I made a video a while back about my top 5 best shows that I've ever seen, which was really easy in comparison to movies because I don't watch a lot of shows. Shows are very big, it's a huge investment of time, whereas movies are a lot shorter by comparison, might be an hour and a half or 2 hours. So I've seen a lot more movies, but given that I made that video, I thought, hey, why not? I'll make a top 5 best movies that I've ever seen, but it was a lot harder given that I've watched so many movies in comparison to shows. Now, as I've stated with the top 5 shows that I've ever seen, these are my top 5 best movies. I'm not trying to tell anybody these are the top 5 movies ever been made in history. It's my top 5. It's completely subjective, and I'll base it on the quality of film, at least for me anyway, in my opinion, but also how much rewatch value does it have to me, because there are a lot of movies that I've watched that, while they are good, like the directing is good, the acting is brilliant, like everything is good, but it just doesn't have a lot of rewatch value. There are just some movies that you just watch it, they're good, but you just watch it one time and that's it, one and done. Okay, so given that I've seen so many movies in my life, it was really hard to come up with a top 5. So like I changed the list numerous times, and I actually ended up taking 2 movies out, which I will name in my honorable mentions. The first being Interstellar.
This thing needs to learn how to adapt, Murph, like the rest of us.
Both directed and written by Christopher Nolan, who I believe to be the best director in the world today, but also co-written by Jonathan Nolan, who's his brother, and the two of them screenwriting is just an unbeatable pair. Led by Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway, Interstellar is the movie that I call the best movie I've ever seen, which is always subject to change, but like the way I felt after watching it, the way it made me think, I called it the best movie I've ever seen. But it just doesn't have as much rewatch value as any movie in the top 5. Like I think I've watched it maybe 3 I know 2 for sure. I think I might have watched it a 3rd time, maybe partly, but it's not a movie that I would go out of my way to watch, which is why I had to exclude it, because I haven't watched it that many times and I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it.
You want to make sure your children feel safe. And it rolls out down a 10-year-old. The world's ended.
And the second one is Warrior.
You're always a front runner. Never had any interest in underdogs. That was your son.
This movie proves that just because a movie has high box office success does not necessarily make it a great film, because Warrior flopped in box office. I think it had like a $25 million budget or something, but it made less in revenue, and yet still a lot of people consider it a great film. If you look on IMDb, high ratings. If you look on Rotten Tomatoes, high ratings. So it's very enjoyable, but given that it's a sports drama featuring MMA, which was growing in popularity at the time, I think some people may have expected more action. But it was never about MMA, it was about the family rift and their issues with like each other and them resolving that through MMA. And it's unlike Rocky, where it's very formulaic and predictable. You have to piece everything together, why they hate each other, like what happened specifically and how they're gonna, progress with their own lives, how they're gonna grow as characters. You have to piece all that together yourself, so you really have to pay attention. So I thought it was a great movie, but it's kind of deep and you have to pay so much attention to those details that even though I have rewatched it more than once, it isn't something that I'd go out of my way to see. At least not as much as the 5 movies I'm about to name.
UFC?
Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
Alright, number 5, Titanic.
I'm the king of the world!
Titanic came out in 1997, directed by James Cameron, and growing up it was one of my absolute favorite films, and it still is to this day. And while it is deep, it's a timeless tale of 2 people from 2 completely different economic and social classes who fall in love with each other, and then it all ends in tragedy, with the tragedy being the sinking of the Titanic. Obviously, the sinking of Titanic is a true story, but the romance between Jack and Rose, the 2 main characters, that's entirely fiction. And though it's a timeless tale, therefore we've seen it plenty of times in books or other movies, it's still pretty engaging, and more so once the sinking of the Titanic begins. The fact that it's based on a true story makes it all the more enthralling, but the movie is very engaging. I can sit down here for 3 hours despite the fact that it came out in 1997 and I've seen the movie countless times and still sit here and not really feel time going by. It's really engaging. And the pacing is also done very well. It's deliberately a little slower in the beginning where you grow a connection to the characters, their romance, and become invested in their story, which sets up the tragedy that is to come when the Titanic begins to sink, and then everything becomes a lot more urgent and the pace quickens. So that was done very beautifully, as was the music provided by the movie soundtrack, which not only heightened the intensity, the tension and emotions felt throughout the entire film, but is also one of the top selling albums of all time. But then you also have the acting by Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, and everybody involved in this film. Like, the film was just beautifully made. It was amazing, and reigned as the highest grossing film of all time for over 10 years until Avatar came out, which was also directed by James Cameron. And despite being out for almost 30 years, the movie is still a classic. Number 4, Training Day.
This is a newspaper, right? It's 90% bullshit, but it's entertaining. That's why I read it, because it entertains me. You won't let me read it, so you entertain me with your bullshit. Tell me a story right now, go.
Now, the movie came out in 2001, directed by Antoine Fuqua, but I didn't watch it until almost a decade later. And prior to that, I had only watched one scene from it. But the movie's about a young officer who is assigned to be trained by a narcotics detective, and the detective comes off as very aggressive, very confident.
You never know, that's the point. Go.
Very competent, but at the same time you feel like something's rubbing you the wrong way about him, whether he's corrupt or something else. But every time he talks, he's making sense and has you analyzing everything you think you know on the subject matter, and then you start to agree with him. But this wouldn't have been possible without the masterclass performance by Denzel Washington, for which he won an Academy Award.
My nigga.
Essentially, the movie is about a cop doing what is right versus a cop doing what is easy, exploiting advantages he has as law enforcement for his own personal gain. The movie's written very well, the pacing's pretty quick, which keeps it very engaging. It doesn't really linger on any specific moment except to have you rethinking about where the movie's gonna head. And the movie is primarily focused on the two officers over the course of one training day, so a lot of the movie is just dialogue and the interaction between those two characters. That sounds pretty dull, but despite being over 2 hours long, the movie has you on your seat, fully prepared to dive into this training day and let the story unfold.
Okay, your dick lines up straight like that, right? To the right of it and to the left of it are pockets, right? In those pockets are money. Look in either one of them, pay the bill.
Number 3, The Departed.
You're a worker. You rise fast.
Like a 12-year-old's dick. Thank you, Sergeant. My pleasure.
The movie came out in 2006, but I didn't watch it until a few years afterwards. Anyway, the movie was directed by the legendary Martin Scorsese, and the writing for this film was exceptional and definitely worthy of a Martin Scorsese film. It also brings together a star-studded ensemble of Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Mark Wahlberg.
Day you wouldn't take a promotion, let me know. And if you'd taken care of this, I wouldn't even be here.
Fuck yourself, you piece of shit.
And I'm gonna need the identity of your undercovers.
Blow me, all right? Not literally, though. Unfortunately, there's no promotion involved here.
Ray Winstone, Martin Sheen, Vera Farmiga, Alec Baldwin, Anthony Anderson. So, I mean, it just has a great cast, great acting, and a great script with a legendary director. The plot of the film is essential. Fuck. I fucking forgot Jack Nicholson.
Don't laugh! This ain't reality TV!
Sorry, Jack. But the plot is essentially a game of deception between a police department and a criminal organization where they're always trying to outmaneuver each other and try to find out intel on the other, and they do that through undercover agents that they have borrowed within each other's organizations. And though they're very brilliant at doing so, the entire movie feels like they're about to discover each other. So even though it brings it down a notch, like with humorous scenes here and there, the entire movie just feels like a very tense ride. And you know, something I really love about this movie is how it kind of depicts the police department and this criminal organization as like two sides to the same coin. Just like the two undercover agents, they're two sides of the same coin. And both the agents, like, they're damn near identical. Like, they come from very similar backgrounds. They both have this ambition, this desire to prove that they're more than what they are, that they're more than what their family was, but they take completely separate paths to do so. And it's very true to life, because even though most of us for the most part have like the same goal, we all take different paths to get to where we want to go. And that's something that's really brilliant about this movie and the way it depicts all its themes and whatnot.
There's no profit. I pay him $2,000 a
We'll
week.
make more fucking money. This is America. You don't make money, you're a fucking douchebag. Now what you gonna do?
I'll make more money.
That's the spirit.
Number 2, Ford versus Ferrari.
Enzo Ferrari will go down in history as the greatest car manufacturer of all time. Why? It's because of what his cars mean. Victory.
This movie is meant to tell the story about the rivalry between the Ford Motor Company and Ferrari at the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is one of the biggest, most prestigious races in the world. And I'm not entirely sure if it's the biggest, the oldest, but it's definitely one of the oldest. But in reality, it's about two individuals that are trying to put Ford on the map in order to take on Ferrari, not necessarily the Ford Motor Company itself. The Ford Motor Company hires two individuals to help design a sports car, a race car.
And how long did you tell them that you needed? 200-300 years?
90 days.
In order to take out Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But even though they share a passion for racing, which is what brings them together, they constantly bump heads because one is a businessman. He is like a smooth talker. He's very charismatic, which is Carroll Shelby. And then you have Ken Miles, who also has a passion for racing, but he has a very colorful personality. He doesn't really know how to shut his mouth. He says whatever's on his mind at any given time, however it makes anybody feel. But he's very good at what he does. Like, they're both very good, the very best at what they do. And this movie, even though it's close to 3 hours long, it's very engaging. And what I really love about this movie, like, not only like the way they structure it, establishing the conflict between Ford and Ferrari, and then moving on with the building and designing of the car, and then the racing, etc., but how relatable it is, because once you begin this journey, you see how the two individuals, like, again, they have conflicting personalities, but they share this passion for racing. And if you have a career, you may have coworkers that you don't like, but you both share the passion for the same thing. But anybody that's held a job, like, you know what it's like to have a job and have a boss and have a corporation and a committee constantly placing limitations on what you can and cannot do, but then blaming you when the outcome isn't what they want, even though you're doing exactly what they tell you to do, but still you're to blame. Like, anybody who's held a job knows what that feels like, and that's what they have to go through. They have all these walls and hurdles to jump, but by the time the racing begins, you become so invested in their story, in their journey, that it's like you're there along with them. And they also have this great sound editing and visuals and everything that make you feel like you're actually in the race itself. So you're so invested that you don't even feel the time going by. So the writing was amazing, as was the acting done by both Matt Damon and Christian Bale, who did a very good job at their specific roles. But Josh Lucas deserves a lot of credit. Now, I know a lot of people don't know who that is. The general public, like the casual fan of movies, does not know who Josh Lucas is. But he deserves a lot of credit because he made his character so unlikable. I wanted to punch him in the face. He did a very good job at establishing that antagonistic relationship with Christian Bale and Matt Damon's characters, Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles, because even though the Ford Motor Company is, I guess, the antagonist that places limitations on what they're trying to do, all that is kind of pushed through, I think it was Leo Beebe, was his name. I cannot remember that exact name. But Josh Lucas's character, he was the primary antagonist for them. He was the one that just constantly did everything he could to make them fail. So he made himself so unlikable, did a very good job, and deserves all the credit in the world. The movie was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, but won Film Editing and Sound Editing. And if you watch the film for yourself, you will know why. And although it didn't win Best Picture, all credit to James Mangold, the director of this film.
Oh, God!
Sat on my nuts.
We're gonna build the next one for comfort, don't you worry.
Number 1, The Lion King. The movie came out in 1994, co-directed by Roger Allers and Rob Minkoff, but I watched it plenty of times since I was a kid, and every single time I sit down and watch it, it's like I'm a little kid again, singing along with all the songs. Like it's just a very beautiful story told. I believe it's loosely based on Hamlet. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it is. But there's a lot to be learned from this film if you watch it. I myself didn't learn a lot when I was too little, but as I got older, I was able to acknowledge and recognize a lot of the themes in this film. But it's just one of the most beautiful stories I've ever seen, and it's a classic. Like, no matter how old you are, you're never too old to watch The Lion King. The movie is also very relatable to me in that Simba and I both lost our fathers at a very young age, and a lot of people know what it's like to blame yourself for something that you're not necessarily responsible for, even though you keep telling yourself over and over it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. But sometimes you just gotta confront that and just move forward. And a lot of people know what it's like to desire revenge for some wrong done to you or someone that you care about, but it's very important to draw that line between you and the one that caused that harm. Like, despite you both feeling the same way, there's a very big difference between feeling a certain type of way and just absolving those emotions and just moving forward and just acting on those emotions and just causing harm to someone else. At that point, you're just perpetuating it. You're not being any different than they are. And that is a very important lesson to teach kids, who are far more likely to act off their emotions and how they feel about any given thing that happens to them, something that's done or something that's said. They'll just hear something that someone else says and they'll just immediately act. They'll be all irrational. They don't think logically because they haven't really developed those skills, which is why it's the job of teachers, adults, role models, parents to instill that lesson in children so that they don't act that way. Because prisons are full of people who could not control their emotions, be rational, and just make good decisions. So The Lion King has a lot of good lessons in it if you really pay attention to it, but it's kind of hard to pick that up when you're a little kid. But I mean, that's the parent's job, to kind of teach your kids know right from wrong. I mean, even though right and wrong is a point of view, but morally, like, you shouldn't act off your emotion. You should always make better decisions. Like, think about what you do before you do it. And although The Lion King is a Disney movie, a children's movie, a family movie, ultimately it's a story about ambition and revenge, and how the main character establishes a difference between him and the antagonist. The antagonist chooses to feed off emotion and act on his desire for vengeance, and the main character chooses to learn from his mistakes rather than just act on his emotions as the antagonist, therefore being the same as he is. Take the story and all these themes into account along with the music provided from this film, and it just makes it super enjoyable no matter what age you are. So yeah, that's my top 5 best movies that I've ever seen, based on both quality and rewatch value. And again, it's subject to change. Like, it's entirely possible that if I dig back, like if I look through every movie I've ever seen, one of them might replace the top 5 that I just listed. I don't know. There are definitely movies that I think are probably better than some of those, but they don't have as much rewatch value, or they have a lot of rewatch value because they're very engaging, but they aren't that good. Like, if you really look at it, they're not really that good of movies. So again, it's subjective. It's my top 5. If you have a different list, that's completely fine. In fact, I want you to tell me what your favorite movies are, your top 5, your top 10, whatever it may be. Let me know in the comment section how you feel, what you think of my list. Please hit that like button. It helps me a lot to push my content out there. Subscribe if you have not already, and I will catch you in the next video. See you then. Bye bye.